powers that be. Sponsored by Alex R. White. Personal injury lawyers you can trust.
Trump's illegal war has to stop right now.
I have fought and defended for my country, our country, for my entire adult life.
The swamp's never been swampier, and it really needs to be drained.
I'm not just talking about doing the job, I've done the job.
The four top Democrats running for U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell's seat joining us here at our WHAS 11 studios, along with the Courier-Journal for our jointly hosted U.S. Senate Candidate Forum. It was a hour-long discussion, a great discussion that we had to hopefully give you guys at home here on WHAS 11 Plus a better idea about where these candidates, again, the Democrats in this Senate race, stand on many of the key issues. It was a extensive conversation. We learned a lot about not just the main issues as far as President Trump and some of his policies and how they feel about that, but also maybe some of what they will be doing on the campaign trail, whether we'll see them up on the air in TV ads here in these final 6 weeks until the May primary. We know Democrats do have an uphill battle, whoever comes out of this, because the Republicans, whoever comes out of that primary, will be seen as the prohibitive favorite here because of just the way Kentucky has gone. A Democrat hasn't won that seat in more than 25 years, or hasn't held that seat in more than 25 years since the late Wendell Ford, so it'll be interesting to see. But there were some key moments and some key differences. Here were the highlights. President Trump's 2-week ceasefire agreement with Iran was the top issue we posed to Democrats running for Mitch McConnell's Senate seat. Charles Booker.
Donald Trump needs to be impeached. He needs to be removed and he needs to be arrested. He said he would be a pro-peace candidate. Of course, he's leading us into endless war.
Amy McGrath.
We need a United States senator who can stand up to Donald Trump, particularly on matters of national security. You're not seeing that right now. We have a doormat for our Congress.
Dale Romans.
No one senator is ever going to change Donald Trump, but 51 senators can. And that's what we need to do, and that's what we need to focus on, is taking back the House and Senate.
And Pamela Stevenson.
We need to be adults and say, not on my watch will you risk my country, my democracy, and the young people that he's sending to Iran.
We asked each candidate about Democratic Governor Andy Beshear's statewide wins in deep red Kentucky and how they'd try to do the same.
We need to have a candidate who can speak to and listen to and hear not only Democrats, but also independents and moderates. And I can do that.
I'm just going to go out and speak the truth, answer the questions, and not beat around the bush, not come up with idealistic plans that can never be realistic. I want to be a pragmatic senator.
I have worked across the aisle in a supermajority, 80 Republicans, 20 Dems, and gotten results for Kentucky families.
Governor Beshear has shown that when you treat people with kindness, you treat them like they matter, you'll find support. And at the end of the day, regardless of party, all of us want to know that the government we pay for actually cares about us.
The candidates agreed on wanting to repeal Trump's tariffs and restore health insurance coverage and subsidies to levels before the president's second term. They differed, though, on support for Democrats trying to force policy changes during government shutdowns.
I would never support a shutdown in Washington for any reason. We can't do it in the state government. We shouldn't be able to do it in federal government. If I could line item shutting down ICE, maybe.
The government has no right to shut down. The government has no right to hold SNAP benefits hostage till they make their political points.
So absolutely, we have to take a stand. It's not about party. This is about humanity. And ICE needs to be abolished.
On day one, I will put up a bill to make sure that if the government shuts down, guess what? Congress doesn't get paid, and neither does their staff.
Their answers also varied on U.S. military aid for Israel.
What we need to do is put Israel on a short leash.
We have to get big money out of politics so that the people of Kentucky are actually at the front.
I'm somebody that believes that Israel has a right to defend itself, but I am not a fan of this current government.
So I think Israel is a key ally to the United States. I don't support Netanyahu.
Each of these Democrats say they'd work with the other party to secure federal funding for Kentucky, something McConnell has taken pride in as he finishes his final year in office. And as for the top high-profile Republicans here, you see, of course, Andy Barr, Daniel Cameron, Michael Farris, and Nate Morris on your screen. Andy Barr, Daniel Cameron, Nate Morris seen as sort of the leading candidates, the high-profile candidates, and Michael Ferris, the grassroots candidate, the one who has pretty much been all across the state, has been trying to get the word out, but doesn't have the fundraising of the other three. We did speak to him extensively. We have that up on WHAS 11 Plus and our YouTube page as well. I did catch up with both Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron out on the campaign trail near the Metro Louisville area. And here were some of the notable takeaways as they talked and courted voters here nearby.
Good to see you, buddy.
Talking about the daring rescue for that missing U.S. fighter pilot in Iran.
I anticipate getting a briefing when we get back to Washington.
Republican U.S. Senate candidate Andy Barr shared updates with voters at an Elizabethtown restaurant on the war and the status of a ceasefire proposal.
We just don't know yet whether or not this is going to be a substantial enough commitment on the part of the Iranians to open up the Straits of Hormuz.
As the only sitting member of Congress in the GOP primary, Barr is pitching his experience on Capitol Hill.
I know how the appropriations process works. I know how oversight works. I know how to pass legislation.
And in a notable moment, he referenced the man he's trying to replace, Senator Mitch McConnell.
Some people say they're ready for a change. Some people are really big supporters of Leader McConnell. But one thing you cannot dispute is that he has a lot of experience, a lot of leadership, and a lot of influence. With me, you get someone who can come in right away and get the job done.
Meanwhile, near Shelbyville, fellow Republican U.S. Senate candidate Daniel Cameron put an emphasis on farmers, introducing his Agriculture Advisory Council.
We should never depend on foreign adversaries to feed our people or for the basic inputs that make that possible.
Kentucky's former Attorney General laid out his plan, if elected, to ban foreign adversaries from owning American farmland. He says he also wants to boost safety net programs for farmers, including federal insurance for crops.
Right now, too many farms are shrinking or disappearing altogether.
Cameron detailed his support for delaying new strict regulations on hemp-derived products, pushed by McConnell. Many hemp businesses have sounded the alarm.
Their greatest concern was that they just weren't aware that some of this stuff was even brewing.
He told us to expect TV ads attacking him to come out in the next couple of weeks. As for his ad campaign,
we hope to be up on the air here soon.
Cameron says it won't be long. The U.S. Senate race will be atop the ticket, of course, here in May and November. But we know that for many of you at home, the 4th congressional race and the 6th congressional race are both big ones as well here in Kentucky. The 4th congressional getting a lot of national attention because Congressman Thomas Massie is trying to defend his seat, the incumbent Republican from Northern Kentucky, against a Trump-backed challenger in Ed Galbraith. Of course, Thomas Massie does represent Shelby County, Spencer County, Oldham County, so many of us just east of Louisville. He was actually in Louisville over at U of L not too long ago this week at the Chow Auditorium, of course, the wife of Senator Mitch McConnell, Elaine Chow, and he told some of the students and other attendees there what would happen if he were to lose this primary. This was interesting.
I have got to get past May 19th. If I lose on May 19th, I am not doing any more government ever. It's a sign from God or the people or both that I, should go back to the farm. I invented the debt badge.
So that's what he says. That's the bottom line. He says if he doesn't win, then maybe politics is over for him. It is worth noting, though, he said later that if he were to win, he did bring up running for other offices like governor, president, didn't commit to anything, but certainly mentioned them. So, I mean, you want to talk about a wide range of what could happen depending on what happens on May 19th. Really could be anything. We'll have to see. A lot of interesting races. Of course, Andy Barr's congressional seat is up for grabs as well. When we come back here, we're going to be talking about Governor Andy Beshear, his trip to New York City this weekend, and he'll be joined by some other prominent names, maybe some 2028 presidential hopefuls. We're going to be getting some analysis on this from one of our experts over at the University of Kentucky. But first, a quick word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Sue, distracted driver.
attorney Alex White. If you're injured, visit SueDistractedDriver.com.
And we're joined now by Stephen Voss, Associate Professor of Political Science over at the University of Kentucky. Steve, thanks so much for taking a few minutes.
Thanks for having me, Isaiah.
So there's a lot to talk about, obviously, in Kentucky politics, as is always the case. I do want to start, though, with the governor, who will be in New York City here in just a few days. Obviously, Reverend Al Sharpton will be speaking to a lot of these potential hopefuls for the 2028 presidential nomination at the National Action Network convention. What does this signal to you? He's on a pretty long list, but it is notable.
Everybody nationwide is talking about Governor Andy Beshear as a potential presidential candidate. Beshear is more or less running for president. Now, keep in mind that a lot of people who are right now running for president will never show up on a ballot. They will never actually pursue the nomination. This is the testing the water stage for potential presidential candidates. But Beshear is doing all the right moves to at least toy with a presidential run.
You know, I was reading an article, I believe it was by ABC News, that talked about sort of courting the black vote. And I know that term sort of has become a cliche. It's used as if it's sort of there's one path toward this, but like many in the community will tell you, it is much more complicated than that. I mean, does that still carry weight to go to something like this? And does that translate to actual voters when it comes time in years ahead?
Right. You know, I think Americans have a perception that the black vote is especially liberal or to the left because they're so solidly Democratic. But in fact, African American voters are not especially ideological, not especially progressive. We saw with Joe Biden's campaign in 2020, when he won, it was the black vote that really put him over the top and allowed a mainstream Democrat like Biden to get the nomination and eventually become president. For Andy Beshear to go to African-American spaces and try to court that vote makes good sense because it is a fairly practical, a fairly pragmatic, not so ideological voter base.
It's interesting. Pragmatic is the use that the governor continues to use to describe how he kind of falls in the ideological spectrum. I mean, if you look at the names of the folks who are going to be there, I mean, these are people who are either at the top of the ticket or potentially running to be Kamala Harris's VP back in 2024. Kamala Harris will be there. Pete Buttigieg will be there. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, J.B. Pritzker, Mark Kelly, the list goes on and on. What would you be looking to see? Say you're watching the conversations. What are you looking to hear for maybe in some of the differences in their tone and their messaging?
Isaiah, notice that that list of candidates does tend to be more mainstream, more establishment Democrats. Those are not the bomb throwers. Those are not the fringe or the more extreme candidates. It's the set of people who very likely would be reaching out for the black vote. Now, the difficulty that any politician, especially a Democratic politician, faces when appealing to a particular racial or ethnic group or other minority group in the society is how to balance both appealing to them, saying, look, I'll be your candidate, I'm willing to work for you, without seeming insular, without seeming as though they view elections or politics as not being about the whole country, but about appeasing certain groups. So in terms of strategy, what I would be looking for is the language that they're picking, the messaging they're picking that both signals to the black vote that they've got an ally, and yet also leaves room for those candidates not to overpromise in a way that would harm their long-term chances at getting to the White House.
You know, you mentioned bomb thrower, right? First thing I think of that who's not on the list is Gavin Newsom. I mean, clearly there seems to be, this is very early still, but sort of a difference in thought on sort of how these Democrats want to move forward. You have someone like Wes Moore who, has at times taken a stand against the president and some of his policies, but then at the same time said, hey, if he invites me to the White House, for this big governor's meeting, I will go. And then you have folks like Gavin Newsom who basically say, give him a taste of his own medicine. Are we starting to see that real kind of, difference here in some of the decisions made?
Gavin Newsom has been acting like Trump, just on the left, on the Democratic side, and that's gotten some pushback. It's going to get pushback from the more pragmatic, the more practical voters who are most focused on ensuring the Democrats can win. and that they have a candidate who can be broadly popular, who will seem to move away from the chaos of the Trump years, rather than somebody who's just going to continue the polarization that we've had. You know, we're talking about Andy Beshear. Andy Beshear is the one who has been very active about making explicit that goal, that message of we need a unifying candidate. We need to move past the Trump years, not try to repeat Trump just with a blue shade.
Just a couple more questions on the governor specifically here. You and I have talked about in the past about how he's sort of walking this tightrope where he's got to stand up to the administration, but at the same time stay true to his sort of galvanizing, reach out to folks on both sides of the aisle message. What would you be looking to hear from him as far as what he has to prove in an appearance like this? What would sort of stick out or be something you're looking for?
Governor Beshear's been really good and getting better, I think, at speaking a language that lets him present fairly normal democratic policies or ideological stances, but in a way that doesn't use the language that runs off swing voters. You know, we have a lot of people who are independent, maybe even some moderate Republicans who are open to voting for a Democrat, but they're often turned off by the language they use, the provocative, alienating language they use. Beshear's been practicing and getting very good at using language that has broad, sort of normal household language appeal.
You know, it's interesting. You bring up the language part of it, the strong language. You specialize in studying voting behavior, voting patterns. I hear this terminology keep getting brought up as it relates to the war in Gaza, and that is genocide. And that is, you know, do you draw that line between the U.S. and Israel? Are you willing to do that? The governor was actually asked by Politico just a few weeks ago if he would call what's happening there genocide, and he moved away from it. He said, I don't like the purity litmus tests. And then you see some Democrats, say a Charles Booker, who we'll talk about, you know, flat out says, yes, it is. I mean, based on your studies, what subset of the voting public does that really represent? Is it just young progressives, or is it truly bigger than that as far as what people want on sort of taking a stance on issues like that?
Now, understand that, Isaiah, that Middle Eastern politics is tough for the Democrats in general. They've got a large anti-Israel component, and they've got a large component of their side of the political aisle that's sympathetic to Israel. It's been a harder issue for Democrats, I think, for the most part, than it has been for Republicans. But once you're taking a stance on an issue like the Middle East, then it becomes a question of messaging, the language you're using. Words like genocide are an attempt to get candidates in their language to signal through code language that they're going to be fairly strong in their issue positions. They're going to be fairly ideological. And so far as Beshear resists the provocative language for discussing complicated and difficult issues, he's saying, I'm not going to jump through those hoops. I'm not going to do what the progressive activists are demanding of me, knowing that it's going to prevent Democrats possibly from winning in a general election.
Piggybacking off that into the U.S. Senate race, I don't know if you've had a chance to watch any of the Democratic forums or debates. We had one last night. They also, the top 4 Democrats, based on fundraising, also spoke to Spectrum News 1 a couple weeks ago. And you take someone like Dale Romans, right, who's sort of running as this centrist Joe Manchin of Kentucky kind of candidate. He was asked about Israel. It was one of the few moments where the candidates really, really differed. And he basically said he supports Israel. He just doesn't support Netanyahu. And then he went on to call it genocide, what's happening, but says he supports Israel as an ally. I mean, how tricky of an issue is that, particularly, say, in the U.S. Senate race where you got to get out of the primary to even face a Republican in November?
Well, you know, whether we're talking about Beshear's appearance at a conference or talking about these candidates in debates, you need to keep in mind that most of the voters who are up for grabs, the real swing voters, don't watch those things. That tends to be the political actives and insiders who most of them already know how they're voting. So, you know, when a candidate goes into a public forum like this, do no harm needs to be their first rule. Are they saying things that are going to get out there and hurt them? nuanced explanations for how I think it's a genocide, but I'm for this and I'm against. However intelligent such a position is, that sort of complexity, it's difficult to get it across to the voting public who will be swinging one way or the other.
When it comes down to those four, right? Assuming it likely will be one, either Charles Booker, Amy McGrath, who have run before. Of course, Dale Romans is a completely new name to politics, and then you have Pamela Stephenson, who's known, on a local and state level for the time she's served. I guess walk me through sort of the ideological differences that you notice. Again, they agree on most things as far as repealing the tariffs. They talked about, rolling back some of the cuts to the healthcare premiums or the healthcare insurance, Medicaid that we've seen. What sort of differences have you noticed in sort of where they fall on the spectrum?
Isaiah, with his hood to the holler language and other positions he's taken, Charles Booker does seem to be to the left of his opponents. But, we're back to what voters actually get and what they process. Unless those candidates get a lot more funding than they have, unless they're more actively able to shape their images, people use shortcuts for making decisions. Now, when it's Democrat versus Republican, party is the most common shortcut. When you're looking at a bunch of Democrats running, though, they can't use party. They'll use other stereotypes. And the truth is that voters are likely to view both Charles Booker and also Stevenson as being maybe more to the left than they should be seen. Amy McGrath, with her military ties that we know about, with the way she's campaigned in the past, will probably be seen as more centrist or moderate than really would be justified purely based on issue positions. So that's what I'd stress is it's nice what stances they take in debates or what stances they take on web pages that might try to massage what they stand for. But the voters usually, especially the less informed voters who often decide these contests, they're going to be using very limited information probably when they make that primary vote, that primary choice.
And based on some of the polling we've seen, I mean, do you figure that Booker is the clear front runner here, and unless something were to drastically change over the next 6 weeks, an important 6 weeks, but the next 6 weeks?
Well, if the polling's right, then for sure Booker is the front runner. The question becomes: is there any reason why the polling is getting that wrong somehow?
Right.
The samples in those polls are pretty small, but it's not usually, polls don't usually make big errors just because the numbers are a little smaller than you might have hoped. For polls to be getting that wrong, you need some kind of active bias, something that's actually shoving the results Booker's way. In a way that's deceptive. I don't know any reason why that would be going on right now in this sort of circumstance. Now, one other thing that would give Amy McGrath or Colonel Pam or Romans a chance is that a lot of voters are undecided right now. So even if Booker's got a strong lead among the ones who've made a choice, we still have a lot of flexibility, at least in theory, that could cause an upset.
Finally, I do want to touch on the Republicans in this race. We've talked at length about them in the past, so I want to just stick to what has happened since maybe January, February, and that has been a lot more ads. We've seen Nate Morris and Andy Barr and the PACs associated and supporting them go back and forth. That is really front and center in front of people's eyes. Daniel Cameron says he'll be on the air, but sort of doesn't have the funds to, and also perhaps doesn't need to this early because people know him. What's notable for you as far as those three top Republicans in this race that have caught your eye here recently?
Well, one thing that really interested me, but maybe because I played a role in it, is one of the questions in the recent Emerson poll that I suggested asked, which of the Republicans running for Senate do you see as likely to be most pro-Trump? And the reason I thought that was an interesting question is it's something we really didn't know. To what extent had Andy Barr successfully convinced voters he would be a pro-Trump candidate? Or to what extent had Nate Morris convinced people that Andy Barr and Daniel Cameron were somehow Mitch McConnell's boys and were not sufficiently pro-Trump? And based on that Republican sample in the Emerson poll, it looks as though Andy Barr's done a pretty successful job convincing Republican primary voters that he's plenty pro-Trump.
Is he the front runner now?
Well, Daniel Cameron has run for statewide office. He did so popularly. He did very well last time he ran in a Republican primary. The benefits of that name recognition have not yet abated. Daniel Cameron's looking strong. Nate Morris has been rising as well, fairly successfully with the publicity around his Charlie Kirk connection and his Elon Musk connection. So I would be hesitant to declare a front runner in a race where so much of the campaign still needs to play out.
Finally, before I let you go, I did want to ask about, I don't know if you've been able to see the ad from Barr's campaign with Riley Gaines. She's become a fairly recognizable face for even maybe not politically oriented people. We've seen sort of the effect that, not to compare the two, but as far as just having a notable other voice in this. I remember back in the Beshear re-election campaign, how everyone talked about the Hadley Duvall ad and sort of how that might have shifted the sort of trajectory. Could this have a similar type effect with somebody who is so fairly well known amongst many in the community, at least her story is?
Yeah, well, Riley Gaines is very visible. Recently, Nate Silver and some other people did an analysis of the top ex-Twitter accounts, and Riley Gaines gets more visibility based on the Twitter data than the candidates and the politicians that we have in Kentucky. So, insofar as Andy Barr can help convince voters of what he stands for through his connections to other people, that's the sort of shortcut I was talking about that people make when they're having to choose among candidates who all have the same R or the same D behind their name. It's one thing to listen to campaign ads. We know they're trying to persuade us. It's another thing to visibly see the candidate associated with someone. Voters tend to put a little more trust in that sort of tangible thing.
Sure. Should be interesting to see how that plays. Stephen Voss, again, professor of political science, specializing in voting behavior there at UK. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Isaiah, thanks so much for having me on.
And that's the Powers That Be. Hope you guys all have a great day. Thanks for watching.
Powers That Be, sponsored by Alex R. White. Personal injury lawyers you can trust.